2015, this year, is a very good year. It's the 25th anniversary of my meeting my dearly beloved wife in Naples. And of course, the fact that we are both here in Venice in this wonderful event, thanks to the Alpine Fellowship. For me, this is something to be celebrated. 2015 is also the 80th birthday of my boss, the Dalai Lama, 80 years old. And he tells me that he's going to live for another 30 years. And he also tells me that his doctors have confirmed that possibility. So this man is going to live to 110 years. And I think this is, for me anyway, is something to be celebrated. So what I will talk today is really about the Dalai Lama's understanding of the self, his understanding of spirituality, and it is somewhat divorced from religion, somewhat divorced from the religion of Buddhism. It is something that he would call a science of mind. And you don't need to believe in things. Science of mind is empirical. It's based on logic, analysis, research, reason. And this is what he usually talks about. So I have written now or co-authored 2 books with him so far. And of course, the process of doing this with him means that I basically go to India, to the Himalayas, and spend some time with him at his home and ask him a bunch of questions. So on one of that occasion, as I was interviewing him, he told me something that surprised me somewhat, because what he did was he voluntarily told me something that is very intimate, that is surprising, something that goes to his spiritual attainment. Because spiritual teachers usually do not talk about their spiritual progress. It is a no-no. What he told me was that when he was one time giving a lecture in Mongolia, in Ulaanbaatar, to a great number of people, there was probably about 20,000 people there, when he looked out to the crowd, he saw that the individual outline of each person has somewhat dissolved, so that he get the sensation that those 10, 20,000 people out there, they were all merged together. Their boundaries have become fuzzy and they gradually merged. And all those people out there became one. So this was a detail that really surprised me, because I would never dare to ask him, Your Holiness, can you tell me something about your spiritual accomplishment? Can you tell me something whether you are enlightened or not? I would never dare to ask a question like that. But he volunteered this detail. Now, what is interesting also is that sometime later, I came across the work of a neuroscientist in America, by the name of Andrew Newberg. And he did a lot of experiments around people who meditate intensively. And one time he took a student like that and put him in his lab and asked him to meditate. Now this guy is a very accomplished meditator already, with a lot of experience. When he goes into meditation, at some point he reaches a very heightened state of flow. It took about 1 hour for him to reach that state. And when he reached this apex of meditation, or being in the flow, he basically signaled to Andrew Newberg that he was there. At that time, Andrew would inject a radioactive dye into his blood that goes into his brain, basically illustrating his brain, and then Andrew Newberg took a picture of his brain. And what he found was a bit unusual, that there's an area in the back part of the brain that he called the orientation association area. That this particular part of the brain, which normally have a great deal of activity, became quiescent. There was much more decreased in activity. Now, this part of the brain, the orientation area, is a supercomputer of the brain. And it always calculates every second the coordinates between myself and you and my surrounding, so that if I'm walking towards here, I will not bump into things, because a supercomputer is like a gyroscope also. So as I'm walking around, my coordinates are always shifting. But the supercomputer would tell me exactly where I need to go so that I would not stumble or fall down, so on. So Newberg concluded the only reason why this part is so quiet with so little activity is because the data flowing into this part of the brain has been greatly diminished. So the brain, therefore, is unable to figure out all the things around, so it has the effect of the boundaries between the meditator and other people and other things have been dissolved. Later on, the meditator told Newberg that at that point in time, he felt as though he was one with everything, that he is not independent of things, of people, of events around him. He was one with everything, and which is exactly the kind of things that gurus or important spiritual masters have been talking about for millenniums. These accomplished masters, teachers have always said, we are not independent. We are all in this together. We are one with everything. The Dalai Lama was in Australia 2 years ago, and he sat down with a talk show host in Australia. I forgot which city now. And the anchor said to him, Your Holiness, what do you think about this? The Dalai Lama went into a pizza shop and asked the pizza guy to make him one with everything. To make him one with everything. And the Dalai Lama was totally flummoxed. He has no idea what this guy was talking about. What's this one with everything? So he asked his staff, what does it mean? but it's not very easy for them to really interpret. You know, you need to be really in the culture to understand. So the poor Anchor, he was just, you know, he was just having a hard time. But I guess he recovered from that. So I guess the point is really that at the end of the day, we all think that we are independent entity. But when you are someone like the Dalai Lama, who happened to, by my calculation over his lifetime, had over 100,000 hours of meditation. And I have seen that somewhat with my own eyes, because I was given an opportunity to be with him when he wakes up in the morning at 3:30 in his house. And he spent the next 5 hours in various kinds of meditation. And if you do the math, he's 80 years old. He has meditated for well over 100,000 hours. So when you talk about independence, when he tells me about when you look out to a crowd and you see them actually kind of merge into one, it is something that is not coming from the intellect. It is coming from something deep in the guts. It's in the visceral. It's something that is attached to his DNA, embedded in his genes, and so on. It's not a figment of his imagination. It's not the intellect talking at all. So this is an insight that in some ways echo what Darwin was postulating at one point. Darwin said, you know, the reason why London is such a wonderful place, such a beautiful place to be, beautiful surrounding and so on, is because there are lots of spinsters in London who were cat lovers. So all these spinsters, and I'm not sure this is the correct word for it, but anyway, that was maybe politically not so correct, but anyway, there were all these spinsters in London who have lots of cats. And the consequence of having a lot of cats is that you will have fewer mice. And when you have fewer mice, the bumblebees have a very good time. They're not afraid. So they pollinate. They make flowers. They produce a beautiful flora in London. So this is what Darwin was saying. This is London is such a wonderful place because there were all these cat-loving spinsters. Anyway, interdependence. Let me tell you another story. In my process of co-authoring books with the Dalai Lama, I also sometimes accompany him on his travels. So for example, at his 80th birthday in July this year, I was with him in Texas, hanging out with George Bush. Then we went to California, July the 6th, that was his birthday. Then we went to New York. So on one of those trips, I was with him in India, and he got very sick. The first time that he was so sick in some 30 years. And his staff was really very concerned about it. And as his convoy was leaving where he was to take him to a hospital in the town called Patna, he was curled up in his seat in a great deal of pain. He was telling me that he was sweating profusely. He has never sweated so much before. He was in terrible shape. So the sirens were screaming, and the convoy was trying to get to the hospital as fast as they could. On the outskirts of this town, Patna, he happened to look out the window and he saw this little boy, maybe 6, 7 years of age, on crutches. You know, in India, there are a lot of polio cases. A lot of people have polio. So the little boy had polio on crutches, had hardly any clothes on him, obviously living off the street, no one caring for him. So the Dalai Lama told me his heart just went out to the little boy. And at that moment, he told me that his pain lessened significantly. Now, he said that it lessened not because he got distracted. The pain lessened because the fact that he had this compassion and empathetic feeling towards the little boy causes a change in physiology, caused a change in his body that somehow alleviated much of the pain. So it was a really serious condition that he was. People have said that he nearly died from this condition, whatever it was, and that the Prime Minister of India actually had to fly him to a special clinic in India, in Bombay, to have him looked after. So it was a really serious thing. And the one thing that really struck him was the fact that when his heart went out to the little boy, his whole condition changed. And this is what he says as a lesson to me, that it's something what he calls wise selfish. That all of us are selfish to a certain extent. We are selfish in the sense that we want to be happy. You know, none of you, none of me for that matter, would want to wake up in the morning and hope that I would be miserable all day. This is the human condition. We want to be happy. But most of us go about it the wrong way. So the Dalai Lama said that if you want to be selfish, you might as well to be wise about it. And for him, the best way to attain authentic, sustainable, and durable, meaningful well-being and happiness is really to think about the other, not yourself, but the other, to care for the well-being of other people. That when your thought goes out to the little boy like this, the first person to benefit from a thought like this, from a sentiment like this, is yourself. You are the first recipient of that benefit. And this is what he calls wise selfish, enlightened self-interest. So this was one of the insights that I gathered from him. The Dalai Lama is also what I would call a frustrated scientist. Even when he was very young, he was very interested in taking watches apart and finding how it ticks, what makes it tick. And so in the last 30 years, he has been convening gatherings with scientists regularly, every year. And so he has special interest in cosmology, in quantum physics. Some of the most important physicists have been trying to teach him quantum physics, including von Weizsäcker, David Bohm. And in the last 20 years, he's been very involved with neuroscientists as well. So he gathered some of the top scientists in the world to go to Dharamsala and talk about basically the intersection between spirituality and science. Because I think fundamentally he thinks that this 2,500-year-old tradition coming from Buddhism that basically teaches a way of life to have a kind of methodology system to enable us to live better, to live a better life, to be happier, is a very fundamental part of our humanity, and that actually it's corroborated by scientific research. So he has a lot of interest and very good friends among the scientists. And one of those scientists who was influenced by him is a German woman by the name of Tanja Singer. She is the director of the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig. And her father, Wolf Singer, is a very well-known scientist, also at the Max Planck in Berlin. Tanja was very much influenced by the worldview of the Dalai Lama, especially around the idea of a spiritual practice centered around meditation. So in the last few years, she has put together the largest ever study on meditators, which happened in Leipzig and also in Berlin. And she was able to get 300 people to go through 11 months of intensive meditation. What she wanted to do and to find out is whether compassion, something that is so intangible, abstract, can this be trained? Can this be fostered? Can this be cultivated in people? So she utilized two insights from the Dalai Lama. One is around meditation. And we all know that meditation is a big thing now. Mindfulness is all over the world. So everybody wants to be in mindful state, business people, politicians, whatever, because it alleviates stress. But the Dalai Lama goes further than that. The Dalai Lama thinks that not only do you want to practice single-pointed meditation, so you focus on one single object at a time and empty your mind of thought, but more importantly, you need to use our own reasoning power, our analytical power, to meditate, to incorporate that in your meditation practice, what he called analytic meditation. So, for example, if you get angry and you understand that this is something that is not very good for you because it destroys your peace of mind, and it also has an effect on people around you, your loved one, for example. So you use reasoning and you meditate on that reasoning, and this is what he calls analytic meditation. And so one way to think about it is that if you understand this idea of why self is, then you meditate on it, and your reason goes to the point that if you are nice to people, if you are kind to other people, then you yourself benefit from that sentiment or from that gesture or that behavior. So from common sense, it's worthwhile for you to be kind, to be caring to other people. So when you are in analytic meditation, then this is something for you to dwell on, to reflect on why it is good to be nice to other people. So this is one point that Tanja Singer took from the Dalai Lama, that meditation is not only sitting there in lotus and not thinking about anything, that there is something that is more complex that goes on in meditation that is very helpful. And the other insight that Tanya got from the Dalai Lama is the fact that we are all compassionate and empathetic to our loved ones, to our kids, to our parents, to our immediate family, to our close friends. But for the Dalai Lama, this is not enough. This is a biased type of compassion. So he talks about a compassion that is unbiased, that you take the same sentiment, the same feeling that you have to your wife, to your husband, to your kids, and you extend it to people that you do not know. Of course, it takes practice. It's easier said than done. But you use the same feeling, same warmth that you have to your loved one. You extend it to people that you don't know very well. And then eventually, you extend it outward so that people who are bugging you, that you don't like, you also feel some kind of warmth, some kind of a compassion, some kind of empathy towards them. So these are some of the things that Singer incorporated in her research. So she gathered a team of people who are neuroscientists, who are meditators, psychotherapy, and so on, who work with these 300 people over this period of 11 years. 11 months. And basically the focus is on cultivating their mindfulness, their ability to focus on one hand. It's also to focus, to cultivate their ability to understand their own feelings and emotions. And then to develop emotional intelligence about themselves, about other people around them, and also develop social intelligence. And this leads to better collaboration among people. And there's also, after all this training, what is the result? The result is that all these 300 people, they tend to do better in their social and emotional intelligence. Self-reporting of how good they feel better about themselves. So in all measures, using neuroscience scanning, using behavioral reporting, health, she took a whole bunch of over 90 different type of measures to see what changes have occurred with these 300 people. So basically, you can say that this is not really published yet, but she told me that the positive outcomes in all these different areas, in concentration, in social and emotional intelligence, have increased. So she came to the next point, Tanya Singer, which is that, well, it's all very well to have all these individuals to go through these trainings, and they become better at empathy, better at compassion, but what effect does it have to society? You know, it's just a grain of sand on the beach. So she teamed up with economist by the name of Dennis Snower, who has a center in Kiel, Germany. And what they thought is this: our economic system these days have, as you all know, have been very influenced by Adam Smith, 18th century. So it's centered around self-interest. But there is also the idea of an invisible hand, which is something that Adam Smith talked about, that everybody have their own self-interest and go about their life. But somehow, paradoxically, it lifts all boats. That even when all the people are having their own interests in mind, it actually contributes to the society in terms of economic output. But then in today's more complex world, we are talking about huge intractable problems like climate change, for example, inequality. I don't know whether you know that last year, 2014, the bonuses that were giving out to Wall Street types, bonuses, not salary, only bonuses, was 2 times greater than all Americans earn in that year. I'm talking about Americans who earn a minimum wage. All Americans earning a minimum wage. So the bonuses paid out to the Wall Street was 2 times of those Americans. So things like inequalities, like climate change, these are really huge problems that old-style economics have a lot of problem dealing with. So Tanya Singer and Snower are now working on a paradigm shift in economic thinking, a kind of a new economy that is based on caring, that is based on compassion. And they think that this is a new way of thinking that can be embedded in businesses, in political institutions, in schools, and in especially the caring profession in hospitals, nursing, and so on. That this new economic thinking based on compassion could have an impact on these endeavors. And I would, to conclude, to give you a bit of example how this might look like. I founded the Dalai Lama Center 10 years ago in Vancouver, and our focus is really much on what we call education of the heart, which means that I believe that our kids are not very well served because they are so focused on the traditional academic subjects, so-called 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, and so on. And especially in this day and age when the pressure is so intense that every parents are trying to get their kids into an Ivy League university or some very elite schools. So the pressure is on academics. And we think that this should be balanced. There should be a more holistic way of looking at education. That there is a way to cultivate creativity, concern for other people, caring for your fellow students, to decrease the incidence of bullying in schools, for example. That social intelligence is a very important element in education. That emotional intelligence is also extremely important. But by and large, not too many schools would create a curriculum that targets some of these areas to create that balance. So the Dalai Lama Center in Vancouver, this is what our mandate is, to try to do something to redress that balance. When the Dalai Lama came to Vancouver, at my invitation last October in Vancouver, I was able to report out to him what we were able to do. And what we were able to do was we worked with policymakers, we worked with politicians, we worked with the Minister of Education, superintendents, teachers, researchers, and so on, so that as of this year, all the public schools in British Columbia, in the province of British Columbia, with some 500,000 kids, K to 12, they are now mandated to have social intelligence, emotional intelligence as part of their curriculum. And they will be assessed, these things will be assessed on the same basis, same importance as on reading, writing, and the other academic subjects. And I was able to tell the Dalai Lama that this is the first time in any jurisdiction in Canada that we have made that breakthrough, incorporating the idea of education of the heart into all K to 12 kids in the province of British Columbia. There are many places in the US, in London, in the UK, also try to do in isolated pockets the same type of education that is a much more complex way of educating the whole person. But as far as we know, British Columbia is the only place that this is mandated by law. So I'm glad that the Dalai Lama was quite delighted with our progress. So I guess I'm past my time. So this is, in conclusion, that when we talk about the self and others, I think that in terms of what the Dalai Lama thinks, he would like to see us diminish attention to our own self and increase attention of caring to others. So the idea of interdependence is something that is not abstract, that is very real, is affecting us, and you just have to look at climate change and so on. That the idea of why selfish is something to think about, that it, at the end of the day, is something that could really contribute to your sense of well-being, to the way you live your life. And then that it's much easier to be compassionate to your close circle, but it's not so easy to have empathy and compassion to other people, that it may make sense to extend this type of sentiment in an outward circle to other people as well. And finally, I should give thanks to both Ellen and Jacob for inviting me to this, and thank you, Maria, for putting me in touch with them. And I also want to thank Muhammad. Muhammad is from Afghanistan. I would not be standing here in front of you and talking to you if I had not met Muhammad in Afghanistan. In 1972, Muhammad and two of his buddies kidnapped me for 3 days. And the silver lining of that kidnapping was that I get to meet the Dalai Lama in 1972. And it was a transformative experience. And now I have a relation with him for over 40 years. At last count, 15 of my siblings and immediate families are either doctors or dentists or successful businessmen, persons. And I'm not. My path has significantly diverged from my family, thanks to my this person, Mohammed, in Afghanistan. So I just want to acknowledge my debt to my kidnappers. Anyway, I don't encourage anyone to be kidnapped these days. Thank you very much.